How
Yeah.
has this changed you as a person?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think, I definitely, I mean, as you can tell, I joke about this sort of stuff a lot. And that's the sort of way that I deal with this sort of condition. And I definitely sort of think that the way I've handled it has helped sort of keep me normal in some way. And I'd like to think I'm still just as outgoing and sort of happy and fun loving as I always was. It's definitely sort of, made me just sort of realize, I don't know if I probably wouldn't have come to London if I hadn't had this, it's sort of, it's that idea of like, why not? You've got one life. It's not very long. Don't not do things. Don't make up excuses to do stuff. And so it's definitely, I think, my day to day now, I'm taking, a little bit more risk, especially when I go on holidays and things like that, where, recently I went to Las Vegas and, I went shooting just because I wanted to go shooting, and that sort of rests up against, the butt. I'm left-handed, so the butt of the gun sticks up against that sort of area, and everyone's like, "Oh, don't do it, don't do it." But I'm like, well, the worst case that happens is I die and I get brought back to life. There's either two scenarios that happen: is I die and get brought back to life, or I just die. Either way, I'm not going to really know the difference. I'm either going to continue on living like I normally live, or I won't know the difference anyway. And so I sort of that's sort of a little bit more of a risk taking sort of attitude that I've got now with a lot of things. And there's a lot of rides and stuff at theme parks where they're like, don't do this with a heart condition. And I like to ignore those warnings just to, I like to think that, well, they probably won't even notice if I die anyway. But by the time the ride ends, I'll wake up anyway. I'll be awake and everything will be back to normal, and I'll just walk away like nothing happened.
Are you afraid of dying in terms of that thing won't save you once?
Yeah, well, that's the scary part. And I mean, and it was probably the hardest news to hear from. I mean, it wasn't the greatest advice from a nurse, but I was getting wheeled out of one of the hospitals after one of my stays, and I was talking about these sort of like, my sort of flippant attitude towards it. And she was like, it's not going to save you every time, right? And I'm like, no,
Okay.
why'd you say that? Don't tell me that. And so that really was like oh shit, like that was a bit of a shock to hear. And definitely it's sort of, and people sort of have asked me, especially in those final moments and stuff, it's like, oh, well, like, do you know it's going to work? And I guess the answer is no. So, a lot of the time is, I might act like I've got the benefit of hindsight now to joke about it. But in those 8 seconds, in those moments, I know that there is a high chance that I might not wake up after those 8 seconds. So it's definitely like that sort of adds to that fear, I guess, and adds to that sort of anxiety around feeling those 8 seconds. So, it sort of definitely sort of builds into this sort of big sort of fear of it.
Okay. But that device is not like a pacemaker, right? It just restarts it. So why don't you have a pacemaker as well? That might keep your heart stable.
Yeah. So I mean, the way I understand it, again, people in the medical field would probably sort of scream that I'm saying inaccurate, but a pacemaker is there to actually pace your heart's rhythm on a full-term basis. So people who need a pacemaker sort of have conditions where their heart can't naturally keep a steady rhythm going by itself, so it needs some assistance with a pacemaker, and the pacemaker is an always-on sort of option. Whereas my heart, from what I understand it, 99% of the time, my heart and everything about me sort of is completely normal, and then it's just those sort of those 8-second moments where my heart, for some random reason, chooses to have a dummy fit and go into these sort of cardiac arrest rhythms. So in that case, I don't necessarily need constant monitoring. I just need it to work for those 8 seconds.
Okay.
And so I guess there's a difference in power needs and all those sort of technical stuff. But yeah, I think the difference is people who need pacemakers actually need sort of constant sort of support in a rhythm, whereas I just need it to shock me back to life when I go into cardiac arrest. And pacemakers, I think there are dual function ones, but pacemakers by themselves don't provide that ability to shock, you back if you do go into arrhythmia.
I understand. Okay. I mean, you've had 9 close calls, and let's hope not. But then, in theory, the 10th might be the last one, or the 11th, or the 12th. Have you prepared for? Have you prepared for this? I mean,
no, I mean, there's I definitely have had to have the sort of conversations and serious think. I've had to sort of seriously sit down and think. How do you handle dying in the 21st century? Especially what happens to, I guess, I've almost got a benefit in knowing that it's coming. Really, I don't know the best way to say that, but it's so, should I start preparing my questions like what should I do with my Facebook channel, what do I all my photos that I ever taken are on my Facebook account. I don't really, they're either on cloud storage that I use, different cloud platforms, or Facebook and on social media. And so how did my family get access to any of my content when I pass away and things like that? And so, I've probably more so than the normal sort of 30-year-old have had to sort of think about, what, how do I sort of how do I sort of handle this if worse comes to worse? And even, the sort of the scary part now being in London is obviously so far away from my family. I've got no family here in the UK. So, if I do have if there is sort of a time period before it actually sort of happens, that maybe I get too sick and sort of goes down that route, especially with the transplant route, do I want to be in England for that process? And will I be well enough to fly back to Australia, or will my family have to fly here? So it's, it's definitely stuff I don't like to think about.
Of course.
But it's, it's things that I've had to think about, I guess. And that's the sort of, those aren't the fun sort of reflective moments of my day.
Yeah. And have you planned it out till the end? So have you decided I want to have a cremation, or I want to be buried, or did you? I haven't
made any formal plans. I mean, I'm definitely an advocate for donations. So I've got my Australian donor card, my UK donor card. Definitely, I think, I'll go on a little spiel here, but in the UK and Australia, at least, it's an opt-in system for donations. So you have to manually and specifically go to, I think, it's the Ministry of Transport or the Department of Transport, and actually say that you want to be a donor and register for a donor. And even then, your family can veto the process after you've passed away. So it's, it's not even good enough to say that you want to do it yourself. You need to sort of make sure your family's aware of that. And my mum and my family are very much aware that I would want to be a donor should anything happen. Obviously they won't be able to take my heart, but they'll be able to hopefully take some of the other body parts. And yeah, definitely, I think, people just need to realize that, how much your organs mean to some people when they, you do not need your organs when you pass away. Your body is a vessel for your brain and your consciousness. And once you've passed away, the rest of your body is just going to rot. So might as well put it to use and actually help save some other people. And, eventually I'm going to need a heart transplant. So, it's unfortunately somebody's going to have to pass away, but who has accepted that they want to be on the donation list. And, there is only one heart available for every 10 patients that need them at the moment. So, there's just literally not enough people donating. So definitely, that's my sort of wishes immediately. And then perhaps donate my heart to a university to continue study, give me away as a cadaver. I mean, I'm very much of the sort of, I'm not religious. I'm not superstitious. So my body is a piece of flesh. And so I want them to actually do something useful with it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's actually because I've recently talked to Harold Mintz, and Harold Mintz was in the year 2000 the first person in the US to be a living donor of a kidney. So he basically said, look, I'm going to give away one of my kidneys because I can, and someone is going to die today if I don't do it. So yes, I might wait until a family member needs it, or I might just do it right now. So he did that. and we're still in touch. And actually, we talked, and I also told him about that I'm going to talk to you. And
Right.
he had some questions, so
Okay.
he told me like so I'm gonna note them down. So now you are on the donors list or on the waiting list. Sorry, you're on the waiting list.
I'm not sure on the specifics. So there is this sort of, I've been told there's a Goldilocks period where you need to be sick enough to need a transplant, but you also need to be healthy enough to survive a transplant or have good odds to survive. And at the moment, I don't think I'm sick enough, but I'm being seen by the transplant team regularly, so that as soon as the moment comes that I need to be on the list, that I'll be put on that list. And I think there's even multiple lists. There's like there's an emergency list, and then there's a sort of just a waiting list, and then there's a sort of like a third like list as well. And then even then they get broken down by British citizens, and then European citizens, and then Australian, like other citizens. So there's plenty of lists, and it's just, I think, I'm not sure technically where I stand on that, but yeah, I'm definitely in that process and going through that process.
Okay. So one of the questions that Harold had was, if you ever wonder if it came to the moment where you get a transplant, who that heart might be from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I've got a cousin who's had to go through the transplant process already. So I got to learn a lot from sort of watching them go through the experience. And, I think there's definitely this sort of, it's a really sort of, I guess it's an emotional question really, because you do have to come to terms that, in the case of a kidney, luckily, people can donate kidneys without passing away. So, there's still a consideration there. But with a heart, you have to sort of realize that no, somebody has died to give you that heart. Like, some family out there is grieving, and they're going through loss, and you've got this person's body part within you. So you sort of do have to sort of reconcile that. And people will, I think, deal with that in certain ways. And I don't know how I would deal with it until I go through it, I guess, or get to that experience. But sort of watching my cousin, I know that it's such a personal sort of moment of reflection, and sort of so how I would deal with it, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to get in it's one of those things, because you got to, am I going to, like, would that family be proud of me? Like, would they, it's like, would they want their child's heart to be within me? Or, like, am I going to do that heart justice? And there's a lot, if I find out that the heart belonged to this amazing, like this really accomplished person, like, is there a responsibility then, knowing that, to do something more with my, it's just, so there's a lot of questions that you obviously think about, and you just sort of, you have to sort of go through. And, I think in many situations, people choose not to acknowledge the person. And I think that's a valid point on itself. I don't know if you've seen the recent movie Vice, which was about Dick Cheney.
Nope.
It's sort of like a comedy biography-ish type movie on Dick Cheney, who is the vice president of America. And he had a heart transplant. And so he had one in. And, in the movie, they make a point in sort of demonizing him and saying that, oh, he's such a cold person, because when he got his heart, he never referred to it as somebody else's heart. He always referred to it as his new heart. And I sort of took issue to that, because, how people deal with such a big emotional thing is going to vary. And you're not necessarily a bad person if you don't necessarily want to think that somebody else is, if you want to forget that sort of negative aspect to it, and that's something that should be something that's personal to that person. And it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means that's how they want to deal. That's how they want to sort of reconcile this sort of process and this thought. And so I think, I'm not sure exactly how I'll deal with it. I think it's just going to have to be something I'll take. I mean, I'd like to think that I'll still be lighthearted. I don't know, I'll still joke about it. I think that's ingrained too much in my personality not to joke about it. I'll be making jokes about whose heart it is, I'm sure, and that I've got somebody else's heart, and all the sort of puns and jokes you can think of. But yeah, I think, until that happens, I'm just not sure.
Okay. Do you think you would take over some characteristics of the other person?
I mean, that's a sort of supernatural question, isn't it? How much does no, I mean, I don't think so at all. And in a respect, I do kind of agree with Dick Cheney in that, a body part is a body part. And I think that's what people need to realize more is that, I think one of the biggest reasons that people don't get donations is because they sort of feel like their organ is theirs. It's like it's a part of, it contains their life, or it's a part of their living experience. And really we're machines, and it should just be a matter of taking out one part and putting in another part. It's not, it hasn't it doesn't know the life it's lived. It doesn't, apart from the health conditions that people may have, it doesn't have a sort of memory, or it doesn't sort of act as if it's, oh no, this is Jamie's heart, or this, it's like, no, like it doesn't know that. No, it's just another, it's like going to the mechanic and getting a new carburetor put in your car. It's just, you're putting in a new spare part.
Okay.
Which obviously, again, it's hard. It's probably hard for people going through the grieving process to sort of think of it that way. And I can definitely understand it, but there is such a donation problem at the moment. And I think, people attributing these sort of feelings of attachment and sort of saying, oh, well, such and such was a painter and now you're going to be a painter. It's, I think that's just it. I can definitely understand it. I just don't think it's at the right healthy case for it.
And looking at the other side of things, I mean, you mentioned that that's a great person whose heart you might get potentially. What if you would get a heart from like this wife-beating, child-molesting, racist, I don't know, dude, and you know it? Would you mind? Would you care?
No, well, yeah, I mean, personally, I wouldn't care. And again, I can't speak for everybody that goes through the process because it is such a personal thing. But I in saying sort of about the, for me, it's just, it's a part. It's a new part. And I think there was a really great advertising, I'm in advertising, so I love to sort of keep track of advertising. And there was a really great advertising campaign done by the American Heart Association, or a similar organization, where it was actually, I sort of recommend everybody sort of go Google this. It was about this really sort of asshole of a person, and sort of he was really, in his day-to-day life, he had like racist stickers on the back of his car, and when it came to like he went to a cafe and he didn't tip the waitress, and he sort of slapped her on the bum, and like it was a really sort of, and sort of the premise is like this guy was a nasty piece of work his entire life, but he dropped out of a cardiac arrest just after he left the cafe, and they found out that he had an organ donor card in his wallet. And so it was like, well, you can be a nasty piece of work your entire life, but you can actually do some good after it by being a donor. And so it does, it doesn't really matter how bad you are a person in your life, just, being a donor sort of helps somebody else then live a life. So yeah, it's, I don't think it would affect me at all.
And Harold had another question that I found quite interesting. Let's say you would be at the point where it's so bad that you really need a heart now, basically, and it's this or then the worst way. And if funds wouldn't be an issue, would you consider a heart from the black market, because there is a black market for organs? Would that be something I would say?
I mean, it's scary to think. I mean, I definitely, obviously, wouldn't make that it wouldn't be in my top 10 of situations of sort of, before it got to that point. I feel like there's, there's these machines called LVADs, which is like a device that acts like a heart. So there have been cases of sort of people who have lived up to 2 years on these sort of machines. So they've literally haven't got a heart in their body. They've just got this machine, and it sort of sits as a backpack on their sort of belt and runs through that. So, I think there's definitely, that would get me by for at least 2 years if worse came to worse. And hopefully by then a legitimate donor gets matched. And, after that, I'd start perhaps looking at more sort of the experimental technology, the sort of the stem cell grown hearts and the actual machine replication heart replicators and things like that. So, it's definitely, it's not something that I'd want to consider, but I mean, obviously you don't want to die either. So I couldn't say if all of my options were exhausted, I definitely, I wouldn't throw it off the table, but it's not, I definitely don't want it to get out. Like, I don't want to put out there that it's not in my top. Like, it's not something that I'm going to like be like, oh, okay, I'm going to go, I can't get a heart transplant now in the next 6 months or 2 years. I'm going to go buy a heart. No, it's like, I'm not like, it's just, that would be the worst of the worst case scenarios.
And it's a tough question. I mean, you never know how you react when your life is on the line.
Yeah, so, and again, it also depends on, even if it's a black market heart, has the person died in that? You obviously don't want to be an accessory to murder in a sense. Like, you don't want to be a part of an industry that has literally killed somebody to give you a high. I don't think that is appropriate. I mean, from a black market point of view, that I would only ever consider is if it is some sort of natural heart that has been privately donated, or the family has decided to, instead of donating it publicly, is donating it through monetary. It's definitely something that there's levels within that you'd have to consider. But yeah, it's something I don't, definitely it shouldn't even be on the table. It's sort of, it's a shame that industry exists, but it's
But I guess, I mean, that's something for everyone who's watching this, listening to this. Go ahead, get your organ donor card. I mean, I'm also an organ donor. Well, not yet, but I will be at some point. And as you said, I mean, the body is a box full of spare parts that someone might need at some point, and it takes a few minutes to fill out that thing, and everyone should do it.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think especially in Europe, I think the tide's changing to make it an opt-out system, which will really help. So
I think Denmark or Sweden or something like that, they have this opt-out system, which is way better. They have like 97% donor rate, which is that's how it should be actually.
I think as soon as it becomes opt-out, donation shortages won't be an issue, because there'll be so many organs available that there'll be more organs than there will be people who need them. So I think, definitely, support politicians that support opt-out, and go from there. And, it's still, if you have religious objections, you can object, but by default, it will be taken as being in instead of out. So,
you mentioned that you mentioned religion. You're an atheist. Have you always been an atheist? Has that changed since you had your experiences? Or
I mean, it's interesting, I look forward to seeing the comments on this, especially when I've sort of said this in previous interviews that I've had in newspapers. Is straight away I've had death threats on Facebook from Christians saying that they're going to send me to hell, and I'm going to hell because I don't believe in Jesus and the afterlife. And there was a Chinese person who actually messaged me on Facebook saying that they weren't the perfect Christian, but they think that I should, I'm going to hell if I don't believe in such and such. And I was like, wow, like, I didn't, like, you're Chinese. Like, I didn't necessarily think that Christianity was that big in China, and B, I'm pretty sure Facebook's illegal. So you're breaking the law to threaten me about going to hell. I was like, that's dedication. But no. So yeah, I am an atheist. I've always been an atheist. It's always seemed to make sense to me. I've never really grown up religious in any sort of sense. And even to the point, I do believe that I've become a stronger atheist since these events than before. And it's almost, I think I'm starting to, I definitely lose my patience a little bit more these days with, people who claim they've had near-death experience, claim they've experienced the afterlife from sort of these events. And it's not so much, I don't think they're lying. I know firsthand now that they could experience something, and that they are perhaps experiencing something. For me, like, I start to lose patience now in that sort of arrogance of saying that because they experienced it, that makes it the afterlife, or that makes it real. And, again, being sort of atheist and scientifically minded sort of all my life, I'm much more inclined to know or think that my brain is very easily tricked and it's not infallible. And I just sort of lose patience with people that think that their brains are so special that just because they had a nice dream of meeting Jesus, that means that it really happened and they went to hell, and it's sort of, you never really, and again, just sort of on these experiences, you never really sort of meet a Christian who wakes up and say they met Muhammad. You never really, you don't have the Muslim that woke up and was like, oh, actually, the Christian God is is real, and I went to heaven, not to. There weren't 72 versions. It's so subjective to your local experience, and I previously have been to New York and I really like New York, so I can imagine why that manifested in it.
Not so sure about that, huh?
But I can imagine, and that sort of helps explain why that manifested in my experience. And, and just that I know from the chemical dumps of adrenaline, all the different sort of neurological chemicals that are going through your brain. I mean, when people talk about near-death experiences, your body is freaking out. It's going through such an experience and it's doing everything it can to grasp onto some sort of functioning level. And it's just, how can you say that you can trust your body at that point? How can you say that your brain, I mean, you can trick your brain right now by Googling optical illusions. No chemicals are needed at all. You can make yourself think that a circle is moving when it isn't. So if you can't even differentiate when you're awake and you're conscious that something is real or it isn't real, how can you differentiate when you're going through a experience like that something is real or not real? So, I think, I've started to lose a little bit of patience since I've had all these events. And so it's definitely strengthened my atheism in a way from that point of view.